She married him to bear his heir. He approached her and said, "What did you just do?" Here she felt tense and said to herself, "What do I do?" Then she shouted at him in embarrassment and lied, "My stomach hurts," and Paris said in surprise, "The stomach?" Here she was shocked again and said to herself, "Wait a minute. If I say I'm sick, will Paris worry?" So she smiled and said, "No, it's not that. The apple was so delicious that I thought I had a stomach ache for a moment." Then, in embarrassment, she started to cry to herself, saying, "I'm crazy. Why did I do that? I can't tell the truth." Based on his reaction, it seems like he doesn't like her very much. At the same time, Paras was feeling nervous and saying to himself, "I was such an idiot that I didn't even understand what you were doing, so what was I expecting? Even I find it ridiculous." Then he looked at her in silence with a flushed face and then said to himself, "However, she's still cute." And Celine was also thinking to herself, "However, he's still cool." Then the scene changes and she is taking a bath and says in anger, "Paris, aren't you stupid? Even though I said I was sullen, how could you be convinced so quickly? Can't you tell the difference between a frown and a wink? You just want to pretend you didn't see my wink. It's better to be so stupid that you can't tell the difference. I'm really an idiot. I've run out of energy." Then she leaned her head back and continued, saying, "If you're pretending not to notice, then my kindness doesn't deserve it. It's even pathetic." And suddenly she remembered Paris's words about the ghost and said, "That's right. They often prey on single women and try to steal their bodies because of the small number of people who come and go." So she got out of the bathtub and said, "Currently, there are a total of 5 people who can freely enter and leave the inner building. And a few maids, led by Anna, only come to work at dawn and then go back. And Anna is now preparing dinner. And it's time for Methel to finish work, and the neighbor doesn't come near here. I don't want to be scolded by the master for no reason." Suddenly a sound came from the window, so she said in fear, "I am alone now." And she quickly put on her robe and came out half naked, saying to herself, "Paris warned me not to be alone. You forgot that, you silly fool." So she went quickly to Paris's room while she was still saying to herself, "Paris, please stay in your room." She opened his door with a knock while she was crying out of fear, and there Paris was standing in front of her, changing his clothes. And when he found her in this state, and Celine looked at him and then started to cry, he said, "Don't cry. What's happening?" And here Paros lit the fireplace, and Celine sat on the bed and Paros next to her on the floor. So suddenly she came down and leaned her head on Paros's shoulder, who looked at her in tension, and he said to himself, "No, wait a minute. Let me look at it again." Therefore he was shocked, and his face turned red with embarrassment as he said to himself, "What is this?" He turned to the other side and continued saying, "Now that I think about it, it seems like her clothes have no thickness at all, and there are no other clothes visible behind the robe." And here Celine was looking at him in astonishment, not knowing what was wrong with him. And here he imagined and said to himself, "What are you wearing under your robe?" If I asked such a crazy question, and her response would be perverted. And here he said to himself, I can even hear her. And here he sighed in tension and said to him, "What were you doing?" And Celine looked at him in surprise and then said to him, "I was just taking a bath." And Paris understood and said, "Right." But inside he was screaming, saying, "Bath?" And here he squatted down and continued, saying to himself, "Why did you come to me dressed like this? I also want to ask why you cried and many other things. I don't want to ask this question because I think she'll leave immediately." So they remained silent for a while, and here she leaned on his shoulder, and here she felt sleepy. And Paras looked at her, smiling and saying to himself, "You're exhausted after crying so much. I moved my bed so I could sleep a little, but you didn't have to sit next to me." And here he said to her, "Are you cold?" And Celine looked at him and said, "What?" And here Paris looked at her with one eye and said, "I suppose you'll keep your robe on." And here Celine did not understand what he wanted to say. And suddenly she understood and felt embarrassed. She remembered that she had left her room without clothes on, and she said to herself, "Now that I think about it, I'm not wearing anything under my robe." Then she looked at Paras and continued to herself, "I completely forgot. Am I crazy?" Did Paras notice? Then in shock, she said, "What if he thinks I'm a pervert? It's the worst thing." And when Paras got up, she looked at him nervously and said to herself, "Did he notice?" But when he went to add more fuel to the fireplace and then returned and sat down next to her again, she said to herself with joy, "Thank God, it seems he doesn't know." And here, when Barras saw her like this, he said to himself, "What conclusion did she reach on her own that makes her smile like that?" He watched her wipe away her tears and thought to himself, "My heart breaks when I see her cry. And if she smiles like that again, it makes me want to make her cry and cling to me." He then placed his hands over his mouth, feeling tense, and thought to himself, "There is no such thing as a strange habit." Then they both said to themselves at the same time, "I must never get caught." The next day, as a new dawn broke, Yart, the assistant, arrived at Barras's door and knocked, but there was no answer. He opened the door himself and thought to himself, "He's not answering again." And when he said, "The witch I mentioned last time," he noticed Celine's hair and thought to himself, "What? Blonde hair?" He felt a surge of tension. Suddenly, Barras slammed the door in his face, and Yart fell to the ground, muttering to himself, "Oh, really?" Barras glared at him and asked, "Why?" Yart, who had just walked out, replied, "It seems there was a witch in the north at that time." He then handed Barras the paper and continued, "It won't be easy because witches know that if their true identities are revealed, they will be in big trouble, but we're tracking her down right now." Barras's eyes scanned the written document. This woman was spotted by several merchants near the southern wall about 15 days ago. Her entire body was wrapped in bandages, and her face, hair, and even fingers were carefully bandaged. And after the Archduke's wedding day, she vanished without a trace. Lost in thought, Barras murmured to himself, "Bandages. Among witches, there are very few who dream of eternal life. Could she have discarded her decaying body and replaced it with a vibrant one? That would make sense. And if her body is the target, at least she won't try to come back." Driven by anger, Barras addressed Yart, "Find her. I'll do it even if it's difficult. The dying body, the hidden family, find anything that could be a weakness." He then turned away and muttered to himself, "I'll be as cowardly as possible, and if I can keep her by my side, no matter what the past, no matter what the goal, and if you ever leave me, I need a weakness that I can hold on to and shake." Yart responded, "I understand, Barras. I will do everything in my power to find her." "Yes," he replied, staring at him and thinking to himself, "This is madness." He continued, still lost in thought, "It's close to the full moon. I hope everything goes well. And before that, shall we escort Her Majesty to the inner palace? Let's place our strongest soldiers as shields." He then imagined Anna addressing the knights. "Hold on to your lives," he finished, saying, "If Anna and I can hold out, everything will be all right." Then Celine imagined him saying, "She looks like she'll fly away if I breathe on her, and I'm not sure I can handle the responsibility of her safety. But if they manage to evacuate the entire castle..." Barras imagined himself enraged, striking at the knights and shouting, "Where did you hide our rabbit?" referring to Celine. Hence, he started trembling and said, "On the contrary, he might be insane." Barras then pictured himself lunging at Celine and yelling, "Her Majesty could perhaps be the gentleman's weakness. Therefore, I want to be as close as possible. But first, we must go and kneel and pray." And here the scene changes with Paras entering the room and closing the door. Then he looked at Celine, who was sleeping, and said to himself, "She sleeps very soundly without waking up. This is comfort." And here he noticed her bare feet, so he felt embarrassed and blushed, saying to himself, "My prophecy was right. She's naked." Then he looked at her with one eye and continued, saying, "I couldn't tell if this woman was afraid of people. It's amazing." And to sleep helplessly. Then he looked at her angrily, saying, "It's really just." Then he covered her up, saying, "What does a thin person do if they get cold in the cold wind?" And she became like this. Then he left Paris, saying to himself, "I'm done. I'm going to take a cold shower and wake up." So Celine opened her eyes, feeling tense, and looked at the bathroom, saying to herself, "Really? Did he go to take a shower? Just like that?" And here she remembered when she saw him talking to a neighbor, saying to herself, "Honestly, I've become sensitive because of the ghosts, and when he opened the door, I woke up lying motionless. Even when Paris was looking at me coldly," and here she felt embarrassed, saying, "Our love kiss, we haven't done it yet. Isn't this skipping many steps?" I almost stood up and screamed, "I'm glad I didn't. I almost made shameful history for this century. Fortunately, I kept pretending to be asleep. But at this point, shouldn't I get angry? Not because he touched me, but because he didn't." Then she got up and went and sat by the bathroom, saying to herself, "Because there might be a ghost." Then she looked at the doorknob, continuing and saying, "When the ghost Nifas appears, I will quickly pull the doorknob."